la la, yo, 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 yo. Geschmack to be a Yid by Moshe. That's the tune. He was singing Hallel, but to the tune of Geschmack to be a Yid, which apparently is an old Vishnitz Hasidic melody. I believe it was Vishnitz. We had lunch with Moshe last Shabbos, and singing these nigunim, these songs at his lunch table with the great Moshe Storch was just such an honor and a treat. How's everybody doing? Great to be learning with you on a Wednesday. Yom Revi'i. Who's in the house? Yehud in South Carolina. Melissa in Great Neck. Stephen in New Hampshire. Sharon in New Jersey. Guy in Ohio. Shender in the Bronx. Bill in mid-Missouri. Lorraine in Texas. Joe in the Inland Empire. Belle in Texas. Lucy in Minnesota. John in Maine. Johnny in Bethel Park, Pennsylvania. Alan in New York City. Chaim in Florida. Elle in Southern California. Frank in San Pedro. Ifa in Florida. Welcome, everybody. Our daf today is page 42 here in Tractate Shevuos, 26th volume of the Talmud. Continuing our discussion of Mishnah number 1 in chapter 6, with God's help, we'll finish that Mishnah, move on to Mishnah number 2. We pick this up right near the top of page 42a. The Gemara relates, we were talking about incidents yesterday, specific actual incidents, where people swore an oath in an issue where there was a debt. There weren't witnesses to establish the debt, so there was either an oath of deposit, if there was a single witness or a partial admission, or as we learned yesterday, the oath of inducement, which is not by Torah law, but is by rabbinic law, where someone brings a claim and is deemed credible enough that the judges will ask the defendant, you don't owe, so swear you don't owe, and then you don't have to pay. And he can get out of it, but in most cases he can't. Right? Let's continue. The Gemara relates, there was a certain person who said to another, give me the 100 dinars that I claim from you. Right? You owe me 100 dinars. And this is the promissory note attesting to the debt. Now, when you have a promissory note, it means that the loan was made in the presence of witnesses who, signed that they saw it. That's very, very strong evidence. Normally, you can collect if you have the promissory note. So what's going on here? But the latter, right, the defendant, said to him, I already repaid you. And the creditor said to him, yes, you paid me money, but that money that you gave me was for a different debt. Right? So the creditor admits that he received money from the borrower, but he's claiming that he extended 2 or more loans to the borrower, and the money that he received was for a different loan than that which is evidenced by the promissory note. In this case, Rav Nachman said that the promissory note is undermined by the fact that the creditor admits that he received payment equal to the amount specified in the note, and his claim that there was an additional debt is not substantiated by a promissory note. So here we would say, no, the defendant doesn't have to pay, according to Rav Nachman. Rav Papa said that the promissory note is not undermined. So the Gemara asked, but according to Rav Papa, in what way is this case different from the incident where a certain person said to another, give me the 100 dinars that I claim from you, and this is the promissory note, and the latter said to him, didn't you give me that money as an investment to be used for buying oxen to be slaughtered? And you came, and you sat in the slaughterhouse with me, and you received your money, including your share of the profits from the sale of the slaughtered oxen. And the creditor said to him, that money that you gave me was for a different debt. And Rav Papa said that in that case, the promissory note is undermined, that the person was considered paid off. So why would that case be different? And the Gemara answers there, since the debtor said, you gave me the money for oxen and you took payment from oxen, and the creditor admitted that this had happened, the promissory note is undermined because there is no support for his claim that there was another debt in addition to the acknowledged transaction for the oxen. But here in our original case, say that the payment was in fact for a different debt. What halakhic conclusion was reached about this matter? Rav Papi said the promissory note is not undermined. Rav Sheshis, the son of Rav Edi, said the promissory note is undermined. And the law is that the promissory note is undermined. The fact that, which is interesting because I'm not sure that it is. He said that that's the law, but when we actually get to where the law ended up in Shulchan Aruch, in a case where one produces a ratified promissory note against another, and the latter claims that he repaid the debt in the presence, that's actually different. You know what? We're just going to leave it at that. Let's move on. And this statement applies. Here's the condition. And this statement applies, right? So there was originally a loan, and with a promissory note to evidence it, which was done in the presence of witnesses, and then the borrower paid back money to the lender, but didn't receive his promissory note back. So now the holder, the creditor, the holder of the promissory note says again, pay me. The guy says, I already paid you. And he says, I lent you money twice. You paid me for this other one, not for the one evidenced by the promissory note. Now he admits that he got money back. He's claiming it was for a different loan, but there's no evidence of that loan. So it sounds like the halakha came out that the note is undermined since the creditor admits that he received the same amount of money as is stated in the promissory note. But under what condition does that apply? Says the Gemara, and this statement applies in a case where he repaid him in the presence of witnesses and did not mention the promissory note to the creditor. But in a case where he repaid him privately between the two of them, in the absence of witnesses, we're going to apply the evidentiary principle of migo. Migo, we could translate as since, S-I-N-C-E, since. Meaning, when the plaintiff brings this argument, and he had a much stronger argument that he could have made, but this is the argument that he brings, it must be because he's telling the truth. That's the concept of migo. How does it apply here? Where he repaid him in the presence of witnesses and he did not mention the promissory note to the creditor. But in a case where he repaid him privately between the two of them, in the absence of witnesses, migo, since the creditor can say to him, this matter never happened, he could deny that he received any payment. So he can also say that this money was for a different debt, and we're going to believe him. And this is like the case involving Avimi, the son of Rabbi Abahu, who repaid a debt in the in the absence of witnesses. And the creditor then claimed that the payment was for another debt. Since it was done in the absence of witnesses, the creditor could have said, I never got anything from you. But he's saying, I did receive money for you, but it was for a different debt. We're going to believe him. Now, the Gemara relates, there was a certain person who said to another who had lent him money, I deem you credible whenever you say to me that I did not repay the debt. And he then went and repaid the debt in the presence of witnesses, and the creditor later denied that he had been repaid. Right? So it's interesting, there was a stipulation at the time of the loan which says, listen, your memory is better than mine. So if in the future you say, I've paid you or I haven't paid you, that's going to be deemed more credible than my own memory of it. So the guy paid back the loan. There were no witnesses there, but there were witnesses there in the presence of witnesses. And then later, the creditor says, hey, pay me back. You never paid me back. Now, this guy's already stipulated that the borrower is more credible than him, that the lender is more credible than himself, the borrower. But did he stipulate that he is more credible than two actual witnesses? Abaye and Rava both say that the witnesses are not deemed credible and the creditor can collect repayment because the debtor, the borrower, deemed him credible at the outset. But Rav Papa objects to this and says, although he deemed him more credible than himself concerning the possibility that the debtor would claim that he had repaid the debt and the creditor would deny having been repaid, did he deem him more credible than witnesses? Therefore, the borrower is exempt from having to pay again. The Gemara relates, there was a certain person, another incident, who said to another who had lent him money, I deem you credible like two witnesses whenever you say that I did not repay the debt. And he went and repaid the debt in the presence of three witnesses. So Rav Papa said that the creditor cannot deny the testimony of three witnesses. As the debtor deemed him credible like two witnesses, he did not deem him credible like three witnesses. Are ears perking up here? Are three witnesses more credible than two witnesses? Are they? Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yehoshua, said to Rav Papa, say that although the sages say that we follow the majority of opinions, right? When the sages are arguing with each other, we'll follow the majority of sages who opine one way over the minority who opine another way. Okay. But do we follow that principle when it comes to witnesses? Say that although the sages say that we follow the majority of opinions and the opinion of three people is therefore accepted against the opinion of two, this statement applies with regard to assessing value, as the more people there are, the more knowledgeable they are in making an assessment of the value of something. That's not witness testimony. But with regard to testimony from witnesses, 100 witnesses are like two, and two are like 100. Therefore, in this case, there is no distinction between the two witnesses and the three witnesses. And since at the outset, the borrower stipulated that the creditor, that his statement of whether he'd been paid back or not is going to have the weight and authority and value like the testimony of two witnesses, then the fact that he later brings three witnesses to testify that he had paid it is not going to override the creditor saying you did not pay me, only because the borrower stipulated that the creditor's testimony would be like two witnesses at the outset. Now the Gemara presents another version of the incident. A certain person said to another who had lent him money, I deem you credible like two witnesses whenever you say that I did not repay. He went and repaid the debt in the presence of three witnesses, and Rav Papa said that the creditor cannot deny their testimony. As the debtor deemed him credible like two witnesses, he did not deem him credible like three witnesses. Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yehoshua, objects. Two witnesses are like 100 and 100 are like two. But if the debtor said to the creditor that he deems him credible like three witnesses, that's interesting. If he said, I deem you credible like three witnesses, more than the minimum number of witnesses needed to establish a matter in court, and then went and repaid him in the presence of four witnesses, then once he entered the realm of opinions, meaning once he mentioned a larger number than what is necessary for testimony, he's entering the realm of opinions, right? Where we said that the opinion of four does outweigh the opinion of three, or the opinion of 100 does outweigh the opinion of 50. The opinion of the majority outweighs the opinion of the minority. Therefore, since he said that I deem your testimony credible like the testimony of three witnesses, he took it into the realm of opinions. And if he actually then repaid him in the presence of four witnesses, the four would outweigh the three, which is the equivalent of what the creditor's testimony has been established to be valued at. He has entered the realm of opinions, and four witnesses would be deemed more credible than three. Therefore, the creditor is not deemed credible against them. These are all very unusual cases, right? Where the borrower says at the outset that I'm stipulating that your testimony is like the testimony of two witnesses or of three witnesses. Very unusual. If you're going to do something like that at the outset, you're probably just going to have a promissory note. But maybe no witnesses were available, no scribe was available, and the lender wasn't going to lend unless the borrower stipulated to something like this, and that's how it happened. The Mishna teaches, one does not take an oath concerning the claim of a deaf mute, an imbecile, or a minor, and the court does not administer an oath to a minor. So the Gemara asks, what is the reason? The Gemara answers that the passage from which the laws of admission to part of a claim are derived, again, if I say, you owe me 100 dinars, and you say, I only owe you 50, that's a partial admission, and now I can administer an oath to you where you're going to swear that, okay, you owe me 50, and you don't owe the other 50, and that you're going to swear to that, you won't have to pay me the other 50. If you're not willing to swear to that, you're going to have to pay me the whole 100. Right? That is adjuring someone, right? Administering an oath to them based on partial admission to a claim. Where do we get that from? Exodus 22:6. If a man delivers to his neighbor silver or vessels to safeguard, and the word man indicates that the reference is only to adults, and delivery by a minor is nothing, i.e. it is not recognized as a halakhically significant act, as a minor is not legally competent, is not competent under halakha, right? Torah law. New subject. The Mishna taught, this first Mishnah in chapter 6, but one does take an oath to a minor. In other words, the minor can act as a plaintiff to bring a case in court, and if you admit partial, you owe him partially what he's saying, then you can be forced to take an oath. You can't make the minor take an oath, but the minor can act as a plaintiff and come to court and then adjure the defendant. But one does take an oath to a minor or to a representative of the temple treasury with regard to consecrated property. You can't make the temple treasurer take an oath, but he can make you take an oath. The Gemara asks, but didn't you say in the first clause that one does not take an oath concerning the claim of a deaf, mute, an imbecile, or a minor? How can you say that he can force you to take an oath? And Rav said the law is that one takes an oath concerning the claim of a deaf, mute, an imbecile, or a minor. This is with regard to one who comes to court with a claim for a debt owed to his late father, and it is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, as it is taught in the Baraisa that Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says there are times when, although no one claimed of a person that he owes money, the person takes an oath on the basis of his own claim. How so? If one said to another, your father had 100 dinars in my possession, but I provided him with repayment of half that amount, he is liable to take an oath that he repaid half, and that is the case of one who takes an oath on the basis of his own claim. And the rabbis say, in that case, he is only like one returning a lost item, as the son did not claim money at all, and he is exempt from taking an oath. One who finds property and is going to return it doesn't have to swear an oath that he's returning all of it. The Gemara asks, but is Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov not of the opinion that when one returns a lost item, he is exempt from taking an oath, attesting to the fact that he did not take anything from it? And Rav said the Baraisa is referring to a case where a minor advanced a claim against him. The creditor's minor's son claimed that the debtor did not repay any part of the loan to his father, and the debtor's partial admission came in response to that claim. Therefore, his admission is not comparable to the act of returning a lost item. So the Gemara asks, how can the Baraisa be referring to the claim of a minor? But didn't you say in the Mishnah that one does not take an oath concerning the claim of a deaf, mute, an imbecile, or a minor? And the Gemara answers, actually, the reference is to an adult son. And why did Rav call him a minor? It was due to the fact that with regard to his father's matters, one is like a minor, as he is uncertain about the particulars of his father's dealings. Here, too, Rav explains that the law in the Mishnah that one takes an oath to a minor is referring to an adult claiming a debt owed to his late father. So the Gemara asks, if so, if the son making the claim has already reached majority, the language of the Baraisa is imprecise. Why did the Tana describe the individual as one taking an oath on the basis of his own claim? This is not his own claim. It is the claim of others. And the Gemara answers, the Baraisa employed the language because, although it is the claim of others, he is taking an oath on the basis of that claim and his own partial admission. Now on page 42b. The Gemara challenges all other cases where the defendant is required to take an oath due to a partial admission are also cases of a claim of others and his own admission. Yet, in the Baraisa, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov introduces his opinion with the term, there are times, indicating that the case to which he is referring of one taking an oath on the basis of his own claim is not the standard case of an oath due to a partial admission. And the Gemara answers, rather, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov and the rabbis disagree with regard to the statement of Rabbah. As Rabbah says, for what reason did the Torah say that one who admits to a part of the claim must take an oath? It is because there is a presumption that a person does not exhibit insolence by lying in the presence of his creditor, who did him a favor by lending money to him, since loans between Jews are never for interest. It's a favor. And this person who denies part of the claim actually wants to deny all of the debt so as to be exempt. And this fact, i.e. that he does not deny all of it, is because a person does not exhibit insolence in the presence of the creditor. Therefore, we're going to make him swear based on his partial admission. Rabbah continues, and in order not to exhibit insolence, he wants to admit to the creditor with regard to all of the debt. And this fact, i.e. that he did not admit the entire debt to him, is because he's temporarily avoiding paying him until he can raise the money. And he rationalizes doing so by saying to himself, I am avoiding him only until the time that I have enough money, and then I will repay him. And therefore, the merciful one states in the Torah, impose an oath on him in order to induce the debtor to admit the entire debt to the lender. With regard to this principle, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov maintains it is no different with regard to the creditor himself and is no different with regard to his son. Right? The lender lent the money and then he died. Right? So there's a loan outstanding that would now, if it's repaid, who's it going to be repaid to? The heir of the original lender, his son. So the debtor would not exhibit insolence and deny the debt even with regard to the son, and therefore he is not deemed as one returning a lost item on his own initiative. Rather, this is an ordinary case where one admits to part of a claim and is therefore required to take an oath. And the rabbis, so that was the minority view, and the rabbis maintain it is in the presence of the original creditor that one would not exhibit insolence by denying the whole debt. But in the presence of his son, who did not lend him the money, he would exhibit insolence and deny the claim entirely. And since the debtor is not exhibiting insolence as he could have denied the loan completely, but instead is opting to admit to part of the claim, he is deemed like one returning a lost item rather than one who is admitting to a partial debt. The Gemara asks, can you interpret the Mishnah in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov? Isn't it taught in the former clause that if the claimant said, my late father had 100 dinars in your possession, and the defendant responded, you have only 50 dinars in my possession, he is exempt from taking an oath, as he is like one returning a lost item. So it sounds like the opinion of the majority. So the Gemara answers there, it is referring to a case where the claimant did not say, I am certain that you owe my father this money, but rather he made an uncertain claim. So in such a case there, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov agrees that the defendant is like one returning a lost item. Here, by contrast, it is a case where the son said, I am certain that you owe this money. You owed it to my father, now you owe it to me. Returning to the Gemara's question with regard to the last clause of the Mishnah, which states that one takes an oath to a minor or to a representative of the temple treasury, Shmuel said a different answer. When the Mishnah spoke about taking an oath to a minor, it was referring to a case where the debtor died. The creditor must take an oath to the minor heir of the borrower. Now we're talking about the heir of the borrower, not the heir of the lender. So are we going to make in other words, you lent money to this man. He hasn't paid it back. He dies. And his son inherits his estate, and now you're going to the son and saying, hey, I'm so sorry your father died, but before he died, he borrowed money from me and he never paid me back, and now you need to pay me back, right? That's the situation. And the son doesn't know anything about this loan, so what's going to happen? The debtor died. So in this case, the creditor must take an oath to the minor heir, attesting that he was not repaid in order to collect from the minor's property. Similarly, right, so that's why now the oath is being sworn by the lender, not the borrower. And similarly, if one debtor consecrated his property, he takes an oath to a representative of the temple treasury in order to collect from the consecrated property. Now, the Gemara challenges the law that one takes an oath to a minor in order to collect from a minor's property is one that we learn in the Mishna on page 45a, right, 3 days from now, where it says a woman who comes to collect the payment for her marriage contract from the property of orphans collects only by means of an oath. So why do I need two Mishnayos to teach the same law? And the Gemara answers by mentioning this law twice. The Mishnah teaches us this. The law applies with regard to both minor and adult orphans in accordance with the statement of Abaye the elder. As Abaye the elder taught, the orphans of which the sages spoke are adult orphans. And needless to say, the same law also applies to minor orphans, right? That would be a Kal V'chomer. This principle applies with regard to both the law that a debt can be collected from the property of an orphan only by means of an oath, and to the law that a debt can be collected from the property of an orphan only by means of inferior quality land. With regard to Shmuel's explanation of the Mishnah that one takes an oath to a representative of the temple treasury in order to collect a debt from consecrated property, right? In other words, if this guy owes me money, and rather than pay me back, he consecrated the property that should have been used to pay me back, and he gave it to the temple. Can I now go to the temple and say, hey, he had no right to donate that property to the temple treasury. It was already mine. I had a lien on it. So he's going to have to swear an oath to get it back from the temple treasury. So about this, the Gemara asks, we learn this law in the Mishnah on page 45a. From liened property that has been sold, one collects a debt only by means of an oath. And what difference is it to me whether the property was liened to an ordinary person? And what difference is it to me whether the property was liened to the Most High, meaning it was consecrated? So the Gemara answers, it was necessary for this law to be stated separately with regard to collecting a debt from the temple treasury. Otherwise, it might enter your mind to say that it is specifically in order to collect a debt from an ordinary person that one was required to take an oath, as a person is liable to collude with another against an ordinary person who purchased property by producing a promissory note for a debt that was already repaid in order to collect property from the purchasers of land that had been liened to that debt, right? In other words, this would be a fraud. He's going to sell me this land. I want that field. He's going to sell it to me, right? But previously, he used that field as collateral when he borrowed money from some other guy. And then, he paid that money back. But then he sells the field to me. And then the guy with the promissory note, who never gave it back to this guy because it was a collusion, there really never was a loan, but he's going to come over to me and say, hey, that field that you bought, Sal, sorry, it actually was liened to me as collateral for a loan. Here's the promissory note with the lien in it. I'm going to seize that field from you. Then what would my recourse be? I would go back to the guy that I bought it from and say, give me my money back. But maybe he's split town. Maybe he's going to claim he has no money, right? Because these two guys were actually colluding. That's what we're trying to protect against. So one might think that that requires an oath in the case where there's three people involved. But one might have thought that in order to collect a debt from the temple treasury, a person is not required to take an oath, as a person does not collude with another against the temple treasury, right? God forbid people would be that, wicked as to collude against the property, the ownership of God, so to speak. Therefore, the Mishnah teaches us that one is required to take an oath even in order to collect a debt from the temple treasury, as one is suspected of collusion in this case as well. And finally, the Gemara asks, but doesn't Rav Huna say that in the case of a person on his deathbed who consecrated all of his property and said, so-and-so has 100 dinars in my possession, his statement is deemed credible, as the presumption is that a person does not collude with another against the temple treasury? And the sages said in response, that statement applies only in the case of a person on his deathbed, as a person sins only for his own benefit. One is not suspected of deceiving the temple treasury for the benefit of his heirs. But with regard to a healthy person, we are certainly concerned about collusion, even that one might collude against the interests of the temple treasury. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 1 here in chapter 6. Moving on to Mishnah number 2. And Mishnah 2. And these are items concerning which one does not take an oath by Torah law. So by Torah law, we don't take an oath on these items. Perhaps we do by rabbinic law. Let's see. Canaanite slaves, financial documents, land, consecrated property. In a case where these items are stolen, there is no payment of double the principal, nor is there payment of 4 or 5 times the principal. In a case where one stole a consecrated animal and slaughtered or sold it, an unpaid bailee who lost one of these items does not take an oath that he was not negligent in safeguarding it, and a paid bailee does not pay for the loss or the theft of one of these items. Right? Again, because these are not treated like other kinds of movable property where we would swear the oath. So again, Canaanite slaves, which is treated like land. Land, as we've seen, you don't swear oaths about land because the land is right there. Financial documents, because they represent, some kind of debt or some other amount of money. But the only thing that you actually have is the documents themselves. That money, which is somewhere else, could be represented by documents which are somewhere else. So we're not going to treat, like a stock certificate in terms of oaths the way we would treat a bag of money. And consecrated property that, is somewhere else, but has been consecrated to be given to the holy temple or to a priest, etc., but for holy use. Now, Rabbi Shimon says there is a distinction between different types of consecrated property. With regard to consecrated property for which one bears the financial responsibility to compensate the temple treasury in the event of their loss, such as in a case where he vowed to bring an offering and then set aside an animal to be sacrificed in fulfillment of the vow, one takes an oath concerning them, as they are considered his own property. But with regard to consecrated property for which he does not bear the financial responsibility for their loss, one does not take an oath concerning them. In other words, if I said, I will bring a sheep, right? I'm not blenator, I'm not saying this now, but if a person said he's going to bring a sheep as an offering, and then he sets aside a sheep to do it with, right? And then that sheep dies or becomes blemished, he has to replace it with another sheep. But if his original designation was that he's designating this sheep to bring as an offering, right? Then if that sheep, becomes blemished or dies, okay, he's not going to be able to bring the offering, but he's not financially on the hook to replace that sheep with a different sheep, right? Because what he said was he's going to bring that sheep as an offering, as opposed to he will bring an offering. That's the promise. That's the obligation, the vow, so to speak. And then he designates a sheep with which to fulfill his vow. Then if that sheep dies, he still has to fulfill his vow by bringing another sheep, right? So what he's saying here is, even though that sheep has been consecrated, since he might have to replace it, it's like that sheep is still his. Therefore, he can be made to swear about that sheep. Whereas if it's fully consecrated, it's not his sheep anymore, it belongs to the Most High. Therefore, he wouldn't have to swear an oath about it if it became the subject of some legal dispute. Rabbi Meir says, there are certain items that are physically on the land but are not treated like land from a legal perspective. And the rabbis do not concede to him concerning this point. How so? If one makes the claim, I assigned you 10 grapevines laden with fruit to safeguard, right? A bailee. He's saying, these are 10 grapevines, take care of them. If something happens to them, I'm paying you to watch them. So if they're stolen, a paid bailee has to make good on something that is stolen while he was supposed to be guarding it. So if it's stolen, he is going to owe to the one who hired him to guard it the value of what was stolen. That's the responsibility of a paid bailee. Now, what's interesting here is he's not being paid, to watch 3 sheep. He's being paid to watch ripe, vines that are filled with grape clusters. So it's on land. So are we going to treat it like land, or are we going to treat it like movable property? Right? How so? If one makes the claim, I assigned you 10 grapevines laden with fruit to safeguard, and the other one says, the shomer, right, the bailee, they are only 5 vines. So Rabbi Meir deems the defendant liable to take an oath, as he admitted to part of the claim. And although the claim concerned grapevines, the primary aspect of the claim was the grapes. But The majority, the rabbis, say the halakhic status, the legal status of anything that is attached to the land is like the land itself, and therefore he is exempt from taking an oath, just like we don't take oaths in a dispute about land. One takes an oath only concerning an item that is defined by size, by weight, or by number. How so? If the claimant says, I transfer to you a house full of produce, or I transfer to you a pouch full of money, and the other person says, I do not know how much you gave me, but what you left in my possession you may take, and the amount in the house or pouch at that time is less than that claimed by the claimant, the defendant is exempt from taking an oath, as the amounts in the claim and the admission are undefined. But if this party says that the house was full up to the ledge, and that party says that it was full up to the window, then the defendant is liable to take an oath, as the dispute relates to a defined amount. That's the Mishnah. Now the Gemara, and I'm almost done. Questions or comments, please get them in now. The Gemara on Mishnah number 2 here in chapter 6. From where do we derive that one is exempt from the payment of double the principal, which is a fine? With regard to items mentioned in the Mishnah, a fine when somebody steals, right? It is, as the sages taught in a Baraisa with regard to the verse that discusses the double payment, for every matter of trespass, whether it be for an ox, for a donkey, for sheep, for clothing, for any manner of lost thing, he shall pay double to his neighbor. And this verse is expounded in the following manner. The phrase for every manner of trespass, this is a generalization. The phrase, whether it be for an ox, donkey, sheep, or clothing, is a detail. And then when the verse states, or for any manner of lost thing, it is then generalized again. What do we do with generalization, detail, generalization? From this, you may deduce, using the hermeneutical principle of generalization, detail, generalization in the Torah, we learn out from that the verse is referring only to items that are similar to the detail. So applying the principle here, one may conclude that just as each of the items mentioned in the detail is clearly defined as an item that is movable property and has intrinsic monetary value, so too anything that is movable property and has intrinsic monetary value is subject to the double payment. Land is therefore excluded, as it is not movable property. Canaanite slaves are also excluded, as they are compared under Torah law to land. Financial documents are excluded, since although they are movable property, they do not have intrinsic monetary value. The value of the paper itself is negligible. Documents are valuable only because they serve as proof of monetary claims, so no intrinsic monetary value. And finally, consecrated property is excluded because it is written in the verse, he shall pay double to his neighbor, i.e. to his fellow man, but not to a representative of the temple treasury. And the Mishnah teaches, and there is no payment of double the principal, nor is there payment of 4 or 5 times the principal for stealing consecrated animals. And the Gemara asks, what is the reason for the exclusion of the payment of 4 or 5 times the principal, which is when you steal a sheep, and then before the owner can recover it, the thief steals it or slaughters it, so it's impossible to give back that sheep. Then when he is caught, right, and it's established by the testimony of witnesses that he stole that sheep and then sold or slaughtered it, he owes the owner not the value of the sheep, but 4 times the value of the sheep. And if he stole an ox, with all the same elements, he would owe 5 times the value of the ox. That is a fine. The original value of the animal that he stole is monetary damages. The additional, 3 times in case of the sheep or 4 times in case of the ox is a fine by Torah law. So what's going on here? With regard to consecrated animals, if he stole a consecrated animal, and then he gets caught and he has to pay back, he doesn't pay the extra amount, the 3 or 4 times, as a fine. And what is the reason for the exclusion of the payment of 4 or 5 times the principal? And the Gemara answers, since payment of double the principal is excluded, that leaves, in a case where one steals and then slaughters or sells a consecrated animal, a total payment of only 3 or 4 times the principal, as the payment of double the principal is included in the larger amount for settling or slaughtering. Therefore, since the merciful one states in the Torah 4-fold or 5-fold payment and not 3-fold or 4-fold payment, one who steals a consecrated animal and slaughters it or sells it is exempt from the additional payments. In other words, it's not logical. It's just that the way the law is stated in the Torah, Okay, if you steal from a person and then you slaughter or sell, and it's a sheep or an ox, you owe the fine. If you stole a consecrated animal, the fine does not apply. Is that good news for you? It might be good news in the short term because you don't have to pay so much money when you get caught and you have to make good what you stole. But you don't get to do the full atonement that the fourfold or fivefold payment would have done for you. And not only that, what you stole, right, was not, you didn't steal from a person, you stole from the Most High. That's going to leave a residue. It's going to take, more work in your, atonement process to make good on that. Okay, Michelle, were more oaths sworn between two parties alone or more before witnesses? Were there guidelines? Well, I think that the oath is only really sworn in the absence of witnesses, right? The reason you're swearing an oath is because there are no witnesses. You don't swear an oath at the outset. You don't say, I suppose you could, that you swear before the Most High, something that you're going to pay back the loan. And then if you don't pay back, then you have violated both borrowing without repaying and an oath of utterance. But when we're talking about oath of inducement or oath of deposit, those are sworn because we don't have witnesses, right? And then the person can get away without paying in the face of this claim by the plaintiff and his partial admission or the testimony of a single witness, which would not result in money changing hands, but could be used to administer an oath. But again, it's because we don't have two witnesses to the original loan who could have established the matter. Lucy, Shimon has been hired by the temple to care for some sheep that were given to the temple. Okay, the sheep are the property of the temple. Shimon is the bailee, and he's the paid bailee. Okay, 2 sheep turn out missing. Would an oath be required from the paid bailee who says that they were lost? No. If he was an unpaid bailee, and he's claiming that they were taken due to circumstances beyond his control, then he would swear the oath, except maybe not because they were consecrated. But a paid bailee can't say, hey, they're lost, right? He was being paid to make sure that doesn't happen. The paid bailee has the highest level of responsibility. I think the only time that he's not liable to make good the loss is when it's some kind of circumstances beyond his control, like armed robbers came. Okay, it's not, in his job that he's being paid to take on armed robbers in order to guard the animals. So he would swear an oath that the animals were taken by armed robbers. There's a couple other situations, but it's that type of idea. If he was an unpaid bailee, something else, that then being lost, being taken by other animals, being stolen, he would not be liable and he would swear an oath. Now that he was acting, that the animals are consecrated and actually in the possession of the temple, but he's the one hired to watch them, it's an interesting question. Can the temple treasurer impose an oath on him? I'm not sure. It sounds like no, because we said you don't swear an oath when the loss has to do with consecrated animals. But who's imposing the oath? That might be like where I've consecrated these sheep. I haven't brought them up to Jerusalem yet. I'm asking you to watch them. Then, unpaid bailee, and they get stolen. Hey, where'd my sheep go? They were stolen. Do you swear? Well, he doesn't have to swear because they're consecrated animals. But if the animals have already been delivered to the temple and he is a bailee working for the temple, then I'm not sure. Great question. Joe, can a fine be considered the same as punitive damages while repayment for damages be considered a compensatory judgment? Yeah. Like punitive damages is, I get, is a word really from, common law, American law. I don't think that we've used that term here, right? Like when you harm another person, we have said that, under Torah law, there are like multiple categories of damages, like there is pain and suffering, there is humiliation, there is loss of work. But those are damages, right? Those are not punitive damages. The fine, which the Torah imposes in certain cases, I think we could liken to punitive damages, but we don't use that term. We use the term fine. Ilanit says, Shalom from Silver Spring, Maryland, getting ready for the great day of Sivan 23, the date of the proclamation in Megillah 8:9, right, the Mishna, or you're saying chapter 8, verse 9 in the book of Esther, that the Jews may now protect themselves from all their enemies. Baruch Hashem. Yes, right? Incredible the miracles that we are witnessing. This mighty Iran, which has been funding terrorism against the Jews, funding and arming Hezbollah, funding and arming Hamas, funding and arming the Houthis, sponsoring terrorist actions like the terrible Amia bombing in Argentina. What was the date of that? Was that in the 80s or the 90s? Somebody can give me the exact date on that. That was definitely organized and funded by Iran. And they've been involved in so many other terrorist actions against the Jews in different parts of the world, and also against America. And now Israel saying, well, we're not going to let them get a nuclear weapon no matter what. They're too close to having it. We got to take the war to them. And in a matter of a few days, we've decapitated their military. We have definitely set back that nuclear program. I don't think it's fully deactivated yet, and that's what the current discussion is about, the bunker buster bomb. But we have, air control over the skies, and we're taking out one missile site after another. The number of missiles being launched from Iran toward Israel is diminishing every day. You can just look at this and say, wow, a superior and smart military is winning. But these are really revealed miracles that are happening in our time. People will study how it happened exactly, but I mean, the fact that the Israelis have managed to know exactly where all these generals are, to take action in the face of so much criticism around the world and so much Jew hatred that leads people to, just ignore facts and condemn us for stuff they don't understand at all because they're following the fashion that has been set by, intellectuals at so many universities and other settings like that. I mean, so much is going on, and exactly right, Ilanit. We are coming to the day where it says in the book of Esther that the Jews are permitted and encouraged to defend themselves. We are so thankful to have allies in this fight against evil, against people who are trying to murder us, against people who lie and manipulate and corrupt around the world. So thank God we have so many allies in this fight. But yeah, it's an amazing time we're living in. And may we keep this war going, but end it soon with a victory and they come with a secure and lasting peace for Israel, for the Jewish people everywhere, for the Middle East, and for the world. And let us say, Amen.